So, Dr. Welch, I know you've one of the areas you've really worked on in your career has been identifying and bringing back to the nursery some of these older outstanding perennials. Do you want to talk about that?
I think that's a good idea, Tim. It's again, many things that have been handed down from one generation to another, and they can be what we call divided, which we'll talk about a little more specifically in a few minutes. But many of these old perennials are sort of forgotten, and some of them are still being handed down and are being picked up by the nursery trade and becoming available again. If they've been grown for a couple hundred years, it's a pretty good idea that we can still grow them today in our gardens. And again, a fun thing is to be able to reproduce them. And you brought up a good point, two good points. One is it's an economical way to reproduce plants, but it also invigorates the clump or the native planting or the natural planting that's around an older planting that's in our landscape. It can be rejuvenated by digging it up and dividing it. Many plants can. So that's another plus to this division process.
So yeah, some of these perennials, whether they form a root system that, an underground root system, whether it be rhizomes or a crown type root system, or even some of the bulbs that we have, these can get kind of overcrowded. They are literally competing with each other, with one another. And even though they're members of the same species, and so as they crowd each other out, they lose vigor and they don't tend to bloom quite as much. I know you've talked a lot about this Johnson's Hardy Amaryllis, the
yes.
Amaryllis johnsonii, and of course it's, as you've mentioned before, it's kind of almost naturalized throughout the South. And my late grandmother, who really got me into gardening, had a clump of these, and my grandpa was kind of complaining that they don't really bloom anymore. And so, of course, I went in and separated some of these, took some for my mom because she wanted to get them established. And they were just amazed the next year at how they just bloomed their heads off. But of course, nothing fancy. We just gave them a little more room.
Well, the hardy red amaryllis is a really good example of one of these heirloom plants that's still around. You may have trouble buying it in some of the garden centers, but it's in many of the old gardens. And again, some very impressive plantings of these, but that have become very massive in numbers and so forth. And they're just really tough. And they came to us from Europe, and were in some of the earlier gardens in the South. And I don't think one has ever died. They're still around.
So we're here at College Station, South College Station, and this is Dr. Welch's garden. And of course, we're blessed with many different perennials here that are really on display here in kind of early fall. And so we're going to walk you through how to divide and separate some of these perennials. And as Dr. Welch mentioned, this is going to be a means for propagation, for clonal propagation, where we can, of course, perpetuate a superior selection or maybe an old heirloom to multiply it in a very economic manner, like you mentioned. But this is also going to help allow these plants to continue on blooming for years to come. So, Dr. Welch, let's go look at some of these, and maybe you can show us some of the outstanding perennials you have in your garden. And we can do some demos on how to propagate them.
Great.
So we're looking at a plant. This is cast iron plant, Aspidistra elatior. It's in the Liliaceae family. Dr. Welch, do you want to talk a little bit about it while I try to wrestle this thing out of the pot?
Yeah. This is a very slow-growing plant, and it's a very easy plant, and it grows well in dense shade. So that makes it a valuable plant, and it doesn't have to be divided, but that's the way we reproduce it, is to divide it, make and that's done over a
so you can see the nice fleshy roots, and what we have here, if I turn it back up, right side up, oops, what we have are many different individual plants. So each one of them, of course, have their own root system, and these all spread via kind of suckering rhizome type action. And so what we have here are quite a few different plants. So what we're going to do is just a little bit just to show you, but we're going to go between these individual shoots, find a couple we like, and we're going to cut vertically, okay, in between the shoots.
We're just using a butcher knife here.
Mm-hmm. And yes, we kind of are butchering the plant, but it
can handle it.
Yes, and it's going to be for its benefit ultimately. So what I'm going to do is hopefully cut out a section of this, okay? And so if we look here, oops, sorry about that, you'll notice that we have everything we need for a plant. We have the leaves, we have the stem, and we have the root tissue, and so we have everything we need. Now this could further be pulled apart, and as long as it's got a decent amount of roots on it, it will make it. And so this is one way that we could really propagate this thing, multiply it very quickly. And of course, for some plants, like for example, I would say you've got some nice antique mums there, like Country Girl and some other ones. But for some of those plants, it'll really benefit them, and they'll really flower a lot better if you do this every, what would you say, every several years?
Well, or you can do it every year, and it doesn't hurt the plant. With chrysanthemums, they're happy to do that. But this also gives us a chance to start. This is a very slow-growing plant, and it gives us a chance to start with clean plants. You can take out dead leaf tissue, little pieces of material, and then when you see, like this is a damaged leaf, and we can take that off. So then we end up with a really manicured,
nice looking plant, yeah.
But we also ended up with a small piece. This is a slow plant to grow, and it's an expensive plant to buy. So if you can get it and divide yours periodically, you can do it at any time of year. Just water it good after you. And this is a shade-loving plant. It doesn't do well in the hot sun. It does very well in dense shade. And this is kind of the large version. There's also a more dwarf version. But it's aspidistra, or cast iron plant, is the name of it.
Thank you. So as you can see, we only took a few of these, but I mean, we could easily probably get, I would guess, if you were really
probably 100 divisions out of it.
Yeah, yeah. And so I know there are some plants also that, like we talked about, that would benefit from this. So this is what we would call crown division. We're dividing the crown of the plant. This is a way that we could very readily propagate some of our ornamental grasses, such as our Pennisetum, our like Princess Caroline Napier grass, purple fountain grass. We could also propagate ferns, can be propagated this way pretty easily as well. Dr. Welch, you talked a little bit about bulbs and how bulbs also like to be divided. Would you want to do some of those?
Yeah, let's do a clump of rain lilies.
So we are now, we talked about bulbs, and we talked about the need for bulbs to be divided every once in a while to help them bloom. What are we looking at here, Dr. Welch?
This is a white rain lily. And rain lilies are relatives of amaryllis. And they these bloom 8 or 10 times a year.
Wow.
Periodically, kind of when they feel like it. But traditionally, they bloom after a dry period and when it rains. So that's why they're called rain lilies. But they're related to amaryllis. And there's native forms of it, and then there's introduced forms of it. And they're very, very easy, and they look good when they're not blooming.
And the foliage is really nice.
The foliage is very nice. Yeah. So.
And this is a Zaphranthis?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And they're very easy. A little hard to find sometimes, but very easy.
So I don't know if you can see, but this is a pretty dense planting. The individual bulbs are close together. The plants are close together. So I know we're going to divide these. Dr. Welch, can you just kind of direct me, walk me through what we're going to do here?
Yeah, you're just going to take a little clump out of there, and then we're going to divide it. You're going to get to look and see what the bulbs look like, and how we divide them. I said these were actually amaryllids. They're relatives of amaryllis. And you'll see the bulb kind of looks like an amaryllis bulb.
So
they're
just like
indestructible.
Well, I hope so. We're going to find out. So just like I did with the aspidistra, I'm cutting down vertically in between plants. We're trying to damage as few plants as possible. We go for a clump, and once we've separated them, I've got quite a few here. I can shake off this loose soil, and we can see these nice looking healthy bulbs. Wow, they really were packed in there, weren't they?
They really are. You
Yeah.
can replant those maybe 6 inches apart,
Okay.
make another border, and you can make a mass out of them, or you can make a row.
Wow, yeah, and we've got some that look like they're definitely blooming size, and some that are quite a bit smaller. But how long do you think a plant like this would
It may take 2 years for that to bloom, but the others could bloom in a month, you know.
And this came from just maybe a 4 by 6 inch area that I dug out. So this is a
They
very
multiply prolifically.
yeah. And of course this will also, by removing that competition with them being so close together, this will help encourage them to bloom more in the future. So we are looking at another type of perennial here. This has many names: Secretia. What were you calling it a while ago?
Man in a boat.
Yeah, man in a boat, Moses in a boat. Many different. Purple heart is another name for it. Do you want to talk a little bit about this plant?
Yes, so the scientific name for those that are interested is Secretia, and it's semi-tropical. It freezes back in the wintertime, and then comes back. And mine made it back, from the hard freeze. This
Which is
past
impressive.
winter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can't guarantee it'll do that in every situation, but it's very tough. And then we'll show you a picture a little later on of a pot of this that we stuck in a pot about a week and a half ago. And the nice thing about it is it looks good instantly, and it doesn't go through wilting periods and all that. Anyway, it's a very tough plant, and it's a good example of one of the heirloom plants that our grandparents and great-grandparents used, and it's still very appropriate for us today. It doesn't mind dry conditions, doesn't mind the heat, and can take a reasonable amount of cold.
So this is a plant that has as you can see, has a very dense crown. It has a very fleshy root system. So this is one that we could separate with a shovel or a sharp knife into clumps, but we can also propagate this one by stem cuttings too.
Yes, and that's what we're going to show on the pot of that was just done recently. And you just stick it in the ground about half that cutting. He's got just about the right size cutting, about a 4-inch or so cutting, and stick it halfway in the soil, and water it every 2 or 3 days, and it'll just go right on growing.
So kind of like if you've ever rooted ornamental sweet potatoes, for example, this is when you don't have to go use rooting hormone on, you don't have to go and make a humidity tent or intermittent mist. This thing will actually just root on its own. So this is one that, we could propagate it by division, like we were talking about, crown division, but we can also propagate it very readily by stem cuttings as well. So we've gone through a couple examples of different perennials. We've done some crown division, we've done some bulb separation, shown you how that this can actually be a very effective means of propagating these plants and helping encourage them to bloom. Dr. Welch, what are some other types of perennials that would be good to do this on?
Well, there's some, of course the bulbs are obvious, but then we get plants like plumbago over here. This white plumbago. It's a perennial plant here, but you need to dig out a piece and cut it back, and then you're probably going to have to nurture it for a little while after you transplant it. It doesn't have a bulb to rely on for supporting the plant, so it just has to make more roots. But it's that kind of perennial is easy to do also.
We mentioned chrysanthemums, daisies like leucanthemum, for example, all would be good candidates. Liriope, for example, can be easily divided as well. And what would be the best time of the year to do this for a flowering type perennial?
Well, we generally say the season opposite when the flower blooms, but that's not hard and fast. Many of these things bloom continuously or off and on, and they can be done most any time. But that is one thing you can keep in mind if you don't know is to just do it at the opposite season of when it blooms. And then we have all of these succulents, that we have a number of here in the garden. They're so easy to propagate. It is not really so much, it is a division process, but they root almost instantly and require very little maintenance to keep them healthy and happy, and even in dry weather. So with the kind of year we've had this year, with it cold and hot and dry and wet, and these plants survive it all.
They're earning their spot in the garden. Yeah.
They are.
So a plant, for example, like the Iris albicans, the white cemetery iris that blooms late spring, I guess now in the fall it'd probably be a pretty good time.
That's the ideal time to divide those. It's a bearded type iris, and they're very, very easy, and I don't think one has ever died. They're all still living, and you can go by an old home site. There's nothing left but the chimney and those irises, and they're reliable, and they bloom beautifully in the spring, and the foliage is even nice. So it's another heirloom perennial that thrives for us in this climate.
And if you're into herbs, things like oregano, mint, sage, all the things in the Lamiaceae family that kind of spread via rutting by stolons and rhizomes, especially mint, oregano, thyme. Crown division is a really good way to propagate those as well. Of course, they also root very readily from cuttings too.
Yeah.
So just kind of
several options.
So just kind of wrapping it up. So perennials, not only is this a very effective means for propagation, but it also helps keep the planting healthy.
Yes. And
the best time to do it for some of those flowering, especially the flowering bulb type perennials, is, you said, opposite
when they bloom. You can keep that in mind. It's nothing sacred about that. Most of them will survive and do well at any time, but that is the ideal time to do it.
Okay. Well, hey, Dr. Welch, it's always great visiting with you. I've learned so much from you. You've just really been just such a tremendous asset through the years to Extension Horticulture. Thank you for letting me come today and use your garden as a guinea pig, as a classroom, and especially thank you for the time spent doing this.
Well, it's fun working with you on this, Tim. Perennials are obviously something that I'm very passionate about, and I enjoy sharing information with you about it.
Well, thank you. Well, for Dividing Perennials, this has been an Aggie Horticulture What's Growing On video. I'm Tim Hartmann. This is Dr. Bill Welch, and come see us again.